Hey guys. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Speaking Sessions podcast. I've got Doug Mitchell here. He is a husband and father of three. He has been the president of Argenta Field Solutions, a sales company specializing in door-to-door, referral-based, and B2B for 12 years now. He is also a sales team consultant and podcast host of Building Great Sales Teams. He's also done some public speaking and really just helped sales teams out and been a very strong leader. Has got an amazing podcast. Really excited to have you on the show, Doug. But tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. First off, it's an honor to be on the show. I've listened to one episode now. I did my research before coming in. Obviously I've seen your social media, I've seen your videos, and the message that you're putting out there is absolutely needed. And I love your service because I've seen so many entrepreneurs try to get up there on that stage. And, even though they're complete experts and badasses in what they do, they fall apart. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
it's definitely needed in our space. So I appreciate you for that. And this podcast, I'm going to start listening now. I started following the podcast this morning, so I'm excited.
Hey, I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, my name is Doug Mitchell. I'm a father of three. I am engaged to be remarried to my ex-wife. So there's a story there that I'll tell at the end. But I've been a business owner for about 12 years now with Argenta Field Solutions. I've always worked for business owners in the past. So that's kind of how I learned how to do everything, right? Because when you first start out, you're the accountant, you're the marketer, you know what I mean? You're the leader, all those things. And so I got my opportunity when I was 23. Haven't looked back since, got into door-to-door sales. The company that I actually bought from my previous owner, our previous boss, was Argenta Field Solutions, and I learned the business, scaled it from there, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, man. Well, that's definitely a credible journey I'm sure you've been on. And yeah, I've been watching your journey as well. It's really exciting to see that. And you mentioned something at the beginning about entrepreneurs when they get on stage, they know their stuff, but then they really just sound like they don't. And I've told the story several times, but I'll tell it again that in college, we were going through, and it was me and two other buddies. The one buddy literally did all the work for this presentation and this project we were working on, did all the work, literally even told us, hey, you talk about this, here's your slides. You talk about this, here's your slides. And so we reviewed them together, like make sure if they asked a question, we might be able to answer it and everything. And we get up there, he got the worst grade. He was the one that did all the work and got the worst grade simply because he didn't sound confident. He was super nervous. And so I always try to push people to get that confidence, because you can know every single thing about what you do. But if you go up on stage and you sound nervous, if you sound unconfident, people aren't going to give you credibility. And yet you have all of it in the world. So I always just think about that. That's what always pushes me to make sure I sound confident, and as I coach people as well, to do that. But, appreciate you sharing your story. What I want to get into to start is what makes you not afraid to speak in front of people. I think that's the second greatest fear, or like the greatest fear, is to speak in front of people. So what makes you not afraid to speak in front of people?
So I think it was because I kind of got thrown into the lion's den early on. So with my previous position before I bought my company, I worked for an entrepreneur, and he had me communicate whatever he wanted to the salespeople. Him and the sales manager did not have a great relationship. And so he said, hey, I'm going to use you as my in-between. You know what I mean? Whatever we've got going on, bonuses, commissions, changes with the process, changes with the product, I want you to communicate it with the salespeople. So I kind of got thrown into the lion's den to where I've got six-figure earners looking at me, and I'm making 30 grand a year as a marketing manager. And I'm also a quasi sales manager, which I wasn't at all. I was not qualified to communicate to these salespeople, but I just kind of got thrown into the lion's den. I had to do it. And so basically I met with them once a week. We went through product changes, marketing initiatives, and all that type of stuff. And so I had to speak in front of these high earners right away. So then transitioning into my business, it made it really easy, because now I was recruiting for entry-level salespeople that were going to be knocking on doors, right? And the only, in general, in order to get confidence in public speaking, you need to know your product 100%. And so in order to speak on something, you've got to know it backwards and forwards. That's my biggest piece, not my biggest piece of advice, but my first piece of advice is that when you go into it, that you know it backwards and forwards, and you're not worried about, I guess, the nuances of the product or the subject, whatever the case is. And so the other piece of it is, when I preach sales in general, I speak the same way. So you've got your intro. Hi, my name is Doug Mitchell. This is me, right? And a lot of times when you're public speaking, you want to humanize yourself first, because when you get up there on that stage, you're this figure, you know what I mean? And it may not be famous or anything like that, but you're a figure that they don't know about, right? So if you humanize yourself right away, you start talking about the things that are important to you, which, yes, is your business, but also is your family. You know what I mean? What you do for hobbies and stuff like that. It immediately disarms the conversation. You know what I'm saying? It's just a human to human conversation, right? And then the second piece is the qualify, right? And so whenever you're talking to a group of people, and this is what I learned in opportunity meetings, right? Because that's people that don't know me at all. They're coming in, it's a group setting. They were expecting a one-on-one interview, and all of a sudden I have to disarm the whole situation. And the easiest way I do that is just ask them about themselves, you know? And especially when you're speaking in smaller groups, this is easier, right? And so just literally ask them like, hey, what was your previous position? You know what I'm saying? And that opens up the conversation. You'll notice that a lot of speakers do their best in Q&A. I don't know if you ever noticed that, because the conversation is natural. You know what I mean? And so you're able to kind of, again, disarm the conversation, to diffuse it a little bit. And then the next piece, obviously, is the presentation, the actual content that you're speaking on. And I think what makes me confident in it is I don't write full sentences. I just give myself bullet points that I want to cover. And so that my dialect is natural, you know what I'm saying? Versus I'm writing these sentences, and, you know, the way people write a book and the way people talk is completely different, you know? So the way you write and the way you talk is completely different. So when you're trying to memorize lines, unless it's the punchline, right? Unless it's the quote, right? When you're trying to memorize lines, you don't have as much emotion behind them, right? And so if it's just a bullet point, if, you know, I want to speak on the Texas flag, you know what I mean? I might just put a bullet point, Texas flag, you know, and maybe a few small reminders about the important information, like, you know, that it was first made by whoever it was made by, right? And the year it was made, and then the history behind the first year that the Texas flag was around, right? I'll just put a few bullet points, and then I'll speak on that subject. So, and then in closing, you know what I mean? You obviously want to wrap up your talk or whatever the case is, but then take it back to humanizing yourself again, bringing back into, you know, your family or your hobbies or whatever the case is, and how those things intertwine into the subject. You know what I'm saying? And so it humanizes you again. And often people remember you more for, you know, the story about your 11-year-old daughter and her chickens that she raises in the backyard. They'll remember you more for that, but they'll also retain what you spoke about, because, again, it humanizes you, and you're not just a figure speaking on stage and then they tune you out. You know what I'm saying? You're talking about things that are important to them as well, because they have a daughter, or they have a wife, or they have hobbies. You know what I'm saying? Maybe they relate to you that way. So
No, I mean,
think
that's a
that's a
great
big part
point.
of it.
Yeah, that's a great point, to have some stuff to humanize yourself, because you're right. No matter how big your name is or not, when you get on that stage, if the person doesn't know you, they're going to kind of put you on this pedestal. Not that they're trying to like worship you or something, but they put you as somebody who's better than them, which is also a unique thing when you do go speak on that stage. But I want to go back a little bit to whenever you first started talking to those six-figure earners, and you
Mhm.
were only making $30,000 a year. You know, we think about this, whether it's a corporate setting, whether it's in groups like we're in, like
Yeah.
Apex, where, hey, we're in this low level, we're just an entourage, which is the lowest level Apex. And then you got the executives, which are in the highest level, and they're making a lot more than most or all of
Mhm.
the entourage people. But talking between the two groups, you know, when you're, I guess, that lower level, how was that feeling for you? I mean, how did you feel going to those guys? I want you to really get into those details.
Yeah. So we often we often call it the imposter effect,
Hmm.
right? And so when I first got in, and I'll speak on executives because I feel like this is more current and makes a lot more sense for everybody listening to the show. So I'm in executives, which is the top level of Apex, right? And you got to pay anywhere from 40 to 60 grand to be in that group, right? And I
Mm,
literally spent my last 40 grand on it. You know what I'm saying?
man.
I went all in. So I'm going into this group thinking that I'm going to be around people like me. Well, I got the imposter syndrome right away because it wasn't
Mm,
people like me. It was people like that had $1 million cash in their account. And they're talking about what they're going to do with it this year. You know what I'm
yeah.
saying? It was people with multiple businesses, you know what I'm saying, that spoke on stages that just crushed life and
Mhm.
crushed their business. You know what I'm saying? So right away, I'm like, I'm this little peon compared to all these guys, right? And so, but what I noticed started happening, and this is what I was talking about earlier, is knowing your space, right? What started happening is they started asking me questions like, "Hey, I've got these sales guys, and I'm having this issue with them," right? Because they knew I did door to door sales, and if you know
Mm.
anything about sales, door to door sales is probably the hardest form of sales,
Brutal,
right?
man. Brutal.
Yeah, but it's also, I feel like everybody should get a foundation in door to door sales because once you do
Mhm.
that, it helps you with everything. Helps you with confidence, helps you with your public speaking, helps you with your sales ability. You know what I'm saying? And you need that in entrepreneurship in general, right? So I digress. But all of a sudden, these guys that are doing $20 million a year are coming up to me and asking me my advice. And a beautiful thing happens when you are working in your zone of genius. So that's a big deal. Like find your zone of genius and work in it as much as possible, as
Mm,
soon as possible, right? So when you're working in your zone of genius, you come alive. And
mm,
you don't even notice the way that you're speaking until you see it on video, you hear it on a podcast, you know what I mean? You actually recorded it, right?
mm,
But I felt it. I felt how alive I came when I talked about building great sales teams, you know?
mm.
And then they would come back to me at the next Flying Friday. So we meet every once a month. They would come back to me and say, it worked. I implemented it and it worked. Right. And these guys are, they're doing B2B sales. They're doing, telephone sales, social media sales. And so to me, this is basic 1.0 stuff. But to them, because they started out at this like easier sales level where the lead was warm,
Mm,
to them, it was like 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 type stuff. You know what I
mm.
mean? And so I
So
was
how did that
teaching.
I want to pause real quick. How did that make
Yeah.
you feel when they came to you and asked you or told
Oh,
you that, man, this was awesome?
and here's the thing. It was just a casual conversation. And then I gave them a
Mhm.
suggestion. And all of a sudden they went from like casually listening to be dialed into me.
Hmm.
Because they said, oh, I never thought of that before. You know what I mean? And I'm like,
Mhm.
that's our second day of training on the doors. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's basic stuff. And so what that did is it gave me all the confidence in the world that, hey, I've got something here and this is my brand. It's not sales. It's not being an entrepreneur, you know what I mean? Which it's part of it, granted, but this is my niche, building great sales teams. Because
Mm,
every conversation that we had wasn't about general sales and sales training. It was about the team aspect of it. I've got 2 or 3 people. I've got 5 people. I've got 10 people. How do I bring the whole team up versus just one person pouring into them and then them doing well? That's easy. Most entrepreneurs can do that, but to manage a whole team of salespeople is a whole different animal, you know?
mm.
And so that's how I kind of found my zone of genius. And once you find that zone of genius, which yours is public speaking, mine is building great sales teams, I mean, you come alive and everything gets easier as long as you make sure you live in that space.
Yeah.
And so once I found it, then I was a lot more confident in front of a room of 5 entry-level guys or in front of a room of 200 entrepreneurs.
Mm. Man, that's gold right there. Finding that zone of genius will create that confidence for yourself. I mean,
Mhm.
that's gold right there. So if you're the audience, if you are trying to get more confident, find that thing that you know about, that you know a lot about. And yeah, like Doug just mentioned here, it doesn't matter how successful somebody is in any part of life. If they're not successful in the area that you're a genius in, they're going to think you're a genius.
Yeah,
They're going to want
exactly.
to work with you. So go find that niche, that little nugget that you can come out and say, hey, look, here's some gold. Let's dig it up and be able
Yeah,
to give it all to you so that you can also build yourself up some more.
yeah.
So how do you talk to those sales teams though? I mean, that's interesting that these guys that are making 20, 30, I mean, some are
Mhm.
making crazy amounts of money in those groups, but they're
Yeah.
struggling with the basics of sales teams. So how do we talk with sales teams and leaders?
So structure is important, right? I structure everything after a sales presentation, which is intro, qualify, present, close, right?
Mhm.
And so I do the same thing in my meetings. But the meetings are adjusted a little bit. So we talk about the fun stuff. We chop it up about our weekends. You know what I mean? I create a casual conversation in the meeting at first.
Mm.
And then I typically go into product knowledge, right? Because this is the most boring part. It just
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
Talking about the actual product that we're selling can be boring, but our guys need to be educated on it, because those 10% of customers that are a little more educated on it and ask technical questions and stuff like that, we need to make sure they have that knowledge. And sometimes we're just brushing up on it, and sometimes it's a new add-on that comes out to the product, whether it be
Mhm.
solar or at AT&T in my case. And so the the next thing I do after that is I go into sales training, which gets a little more exciting. Now we're getting up, we're doing some role play. We're focusing on the product knowledge we just taught on, and we're inserting it into the sales training we're talking about, whether it's overcoming closing objections or getting the customers' attention when we're doing the intro, whatever the case is, we go into sales training. And then after that, we put it all together in role play. And then we typically do something fun at the end. You know what I mean? And it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you're 45 or 25. Everybody likes playing games. You know? So what I typically do is take the games we all know and turn them into, relate them around sales.
Mhm.
Wayne does this. So Wayne's my vice president of sales. He does this awesome thing he calls Ghetto Jeopardy, right? And it's Jeopardy, but it's like the subjects are like, Chili's restaurants and the menu. You know what I mean? It's
Mm.
just like this all these off the wall subjects, and these guys have so much fun with it. And then they go out into their day just, in that flow state, in that like happy state, I guess you could say. And that's how we typically close out our meetings.
Mm.
And so that's how we typically run it. Now, when I'm talking to a group of business owners, again, it's the same process: intro, humanize myself, and then I'm going to present my zone of genius, right? And then from my zone of genius, I'm going to go into the things that everybody talks about, right? Because they are important. They feed the zone
Mhm.
genius, which is mindset. And so I'm going to go into mindset and how I got into the mindset that I have now, and how it's increased my zone of genius and made it so much better, you know, and the tools that I use to do that, right?
Mhm.
And so they're only listening to me at that point. They haven't tuned me out because I didn't go straight into mindset and board. Oh, wait, everybody talks about mindset. Everybody talks about not quitting and trying hard, and all the things you can do to feed your mind, and reading books, and having a morning routine and having an evening routine, and planning my week on Sundays. Everybody talks about that, but if you start with your zone of genius first and then you go into the mindset conversation, that typically is a nice mix to where no matter who they are, even if they don't have a sales team or don't ever plan on hiring salespeople, they get something out of the mindset piece. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And then if they have the mindset on lock and they're really good about that, maybe they get one or two nuggets, but they get something out of the sales training or building great sales teams, right? So I try to
Mhm.
mix it in there and make sure that it applies to everybody. It's not
Yeah.
always easy.
Yeah. And I think that's great, man. And I don't know if you've really thought about this, but when you're talking about your zone of genius and then you bring up the mindset, you're really backing up what that zone of genius is and how you actually really apply that as well and what all you
Mhm.
need. Cause you're right. I mean, mindset goes into everything. And we don't think about that a lot of times, especially when we're first starting out. We think, oh, I could just kind of graduate or just get the motivation. That's the big
Yeah.
thing. I just be motivated every day. And you have to have that mindset that no, like I'm all in, I'm doing
Mhm.
this. It doesn't matter what's going on. I will make it happen. And I love that you mentioned morning, evening routines, setting up your week there on Sundays and everything. All
Yeah.
those things are huge. They're pivotal. That's something I've started implementing as well. And it's
Mhm.
been life changing.
Absolutely.
So, but as far as like going in front of the sales teams, I know you kind of had not done it. You started
Mhm.
doing it. Was there any kind of nerves that you had to overcome with that? Or that kind of was by that point, it was natural?
No, I screwed up a lot. I mean, yeah, like I would love to like FaceTime Dustin Gallier right now. He was the sales manager at the time. And so when I would have
Hmm.
conversations with these guys, I would like to get his point of view when I talk to him
Hmm.
the first 20 times. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? Sometimes in my opinion, in order to be a great speaker, you just need to put in the reps.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? You need to go after every stage you can find. I know you've got an event coming up. So if
Hmm.
anybody's in their area, and obviously you're going to audit them.
Yeah.
Just let anyone on stage, but
Yeah.
you should be looking around your area for events and a way to get on. It doesn't matter if there's 2 people in the audience, you need
Hmm.
reps. And so that when you do get that opportunity to be on a 50-person stage, 100-person stage, 1,000-person stage, you've got reps behind you and you've already screwed up. And so that's all it was. I got my
Hmm.
reps early, super early. And that's the thing about being that entrepreneur that did the mowing lawns and did the detailing cars. I had to present my product to people that had, like we were talking about earlier, higher net worth, more success. You know what I'm saying? People that were probably judging me every word that I said, but I
Hmm.
had to sell my product, you know? And
Yeah.
so that was more reps. And then I had to pitch my idea to the owners that I worked for in different businesses. And so that was
Mm.
more reps. And so if you can go find those reps, then you're going to get better and better and better. And then you're also going to lean into the things you're good at, which maybe certain parts of the conversation or Q&A or, different pieces of your subject, whatever the case is, you're going to tend to, oh, shoot, I'm good at talking about this. And I have less ums and, stuff like that when I talk about this thing because
Mm.
it's more important to me versus this thing is kind of boring. And, you get more of the ums and ahs and, blank spots and stuff when you talk about this other subject, just
Yeah.
more reps, a lot more reps.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. And then really knowing what you're going to talk about. So that zone of genius, you know what you're talking about. You don't necessarily have to prepare, but being prepared and knowing what you're going to talk about is a huge thing as well. So I've
Mhm.
known some very polished speakers being in Toastmasters and everything. There'll be guys that they have the prepared speech, man, almost flawless. I mean, maybe one or two ums and ahs.
Yeah.
Then we do what we call, I'm blanking out on it, but basically unprepared speeches, impromptu speeches, and they're just the whole time stuttering because they're not prepared. And that's a unique thing with sales is that you have prepared stuff. Like you said, you have your intro, you're going to talk about your presentation, you're going to handle objections, and you're going to close out. But through that, you don't know what objections they're going to give you. You don't
Mhm.
know what information or questions they're going to ask throughout your presentation. And so there is some of that impromptu side, and you have to have both of those for sure.
So our superpower in sales is when you have a good sales organization or a sales
Mm.
team, you guys role play.
Mm.
And so you have your meetings and you role play, right? And it does happen as a leader, as a manager, you have to listen to their role plays and you have to make sure they're not just saying the same stuff and overcoming the same stuff to where
Yeah.
they're taking the same reps every day. They got to be taking different reps. And so you lead the role play in terms of how or what subjects they're talking about or what part of the conversation they're getting into. We do this thing called firing squad.
Mm.
And so if you have a group of entrepreneurs around you, get them all together. You know what I'm saying? And
Mm.
put one in the middle and everybody else stands on the outside. And all you do is you face one person, they give you an objection, you overcome the objection. You go to the next person, they give you an objection, excuse me. Got a tickle in my throat.
You're good.
So you face one person, they give you an objection, you overcome it. You go to the next, you overcome it, and you do that like 5 or 6 times in a row, however many people you have. And then by the end of it, you're just on point. You know what I'm saying? You're
Hmm.
warmed up, you're ready for the day. That's a big deal in sales. So role play is huge. And so, yeah, if you have a talk coming up, you have a meeting coming up, you're in the corporate world, whatever the case is, utilize your family and role play your conversation in front of your family. And there's no
Hmm.
one to give you better criticism than your significant other.
Yeah. Oh,
she,
yeah.
she, he or she will have no problem telling you how you screwed up.
Right. Especially you
And think
give them
about it.
that free reign.
Mhm. Like when I go in front of my salespeople, it's easy. I did a career day for my kids the other day, and the principal is basically my mother-in-law, right?
Mhm.
And so she knows me, and she knows that I'm a charismatic speaker, and I'm good with kids and all that. So she puts me on the stage,
Mm.
you know. And so there's a stage, and not only does she put me on the stage, I have no breaks. It's back to back, so I get every grade level, and then at the end, I get the whole school on the
Man.
stage, you know. And so, but I will tell you, I was more nervous for that than I would be if I stood up in front of all the executives and did a training on sales structure,
Crazy.
because my kids were in the audience and
Mhm.
my woman was in the audience. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? These people that I care more about their opinion than anybody else,
Mm.
about what kind of man I am, what kind of human I am, were in the audience. So that made it so much more pressure, I guess you could say. So if you cut your teeth on your family, you know what I'm saying, and
Mm.
you do the presentation for them, and I think it's reps. You're going to be a lot more prepared for it. So that's your version of role play if you don't have
Mm.
5 other people to do it with.
Oh, I like that, man. That's good, and that makes a lot of sense. And actually, that makes me think of a point that when you think about what the audience is going to perceive of you, that's a bad thing. Like, stop worrying
Mm-hmm.
about yourself. That's when you're not going to speak well. And that's kind of not that you spoke bad, but you were more
Right.
nervous because you're like,
Oh,
oh
heck
man,
yeah.
my kids and my wife, they're gonna be
Yeah.
out there judging me. And so if we worry about that, we're not going to speak well. So no, good point, even though you didn't mean to make that point.
Yeah. No, but it
Great
makes
point.
sense what you're saying, because the times that I speak the best are when I'm in front of my salespeople and I'm trying to get the best version of
Hmm.
themselves out of them, because I know
Mm.
the impact that that's going to create, and that's my
Hmm.
motivation, is the impact. And when
Mm.
your motivation is the impact you're making from your speech, I feel like you're going to enter a flow state so much faster versus you're thinking about the critiques you're going to get back from the audience. So that's
Yeah.
that's a great point.
Yeah. Well, Doug, I want to ask you one last question here. If you could only speak one message for the rest of your life, what would that message be?
So it would be a personal message, and it would be a message of legacy. And it's easy to speak on building a business that creates a legacy, but it's a
Mhm.
lot harder to speak on building yourself and that creating a legacy. So the man you are, and I'm going to speak on men here because I'm a man,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? So unfortunately, I'm going to leave women out of this, right?
So you're
And
calling
so,
yourself a biologist?
how dare I? So for us, there's temptations in this world that will destroy you. You know what I mean? And so I would love someday to speak on that, and what that did to my life in my 20s, and how to avoid it moving forward, through things like faith and discipline and purpose and legacy. I have this vision, and it's not this, looking out over thousands of salespeople that work for me and building this massive company. I have this vision of my kids and my grandkids and my great grandkids all around an oak tree on the 100-acre property that I haven't bought yet. And they're talking about what they're going to do with the legacy that I left them, not just the land, but the name. You know what I mean? And so I would love to speak on that, how to act as a man every day in order to build a legacy like that. And one of my mentors, and he's everybody's mentor, Ryan Stewman, I asked him, how do I recruit top tier salespeople, elite. I want closers. I've built the business out. I'm great at recruiting entry level people, but I've never been able to get those top tier people. And he said, you have to be the example. So he's got a book coming out called Be the Example. And I didn't know it at the time. He told me this back at our Cabo mastermind. But he's like, you have to be the example. And the easiest ways is to use the tools I provided you with, like G Code, and that Andy Frisell has provided you with, like 75 hard, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And that's how you build your discipline. And then you build on top of that discipline, your zone of genius and the impact that you want to have. And then you build from there, and that creates a legacy, right? But a legacy can be, hey, Doug Mitchell built a strong family. You know what I'm saying? And he was a man, when he died, maybe not in my 20s, but when he died, he was a man of integrity. He was a man of God. You know what I mean? He was a man of his family, and he was a man of purpose. And so I would want to speak on that, and it's more of a general subject. It's not niche, like building great sales teams, but I feel like I could have the most impact if I did that.
So I got to ask you another question. What's stopping you from doing that?
Oh, not a damn thing. Reps, 100% reps. So my way to get in front of people is building great sales teams. And, it's funny you say this, because we just had a Fly-In Friday. And one of my big struggles has been, okay, my podcast is building great sales teams, but every now and then the conversation turns, like it is right now. The conversation turns and it becomes general entrepreneurship. And that's what I didn't want to happen, right? I wanted a niche, just like you have your niche, I have mine, right? And then, I'm talking to all these executives and they're like, look, just be yourself and let it flow. Just let it all come out. You know what I'm saying? And one of the most impact I've had is my conversations on other people's podcasts about my 20s and the business that I built, and, how I screwed it all up, and I screwed up my marriage and everything. And I've had a lot more impact that way. You know what I'm saying? And so, I was asking them, I have this podcast and it's getting some steam, getting some listeners and everything. Should I just stay in my lane? And the answer from all these executives, remember we were talking about earlier, $1 million in the account, 20, 30, $40 million companies. And they're like, no, do not hold yourself back in any way, shape, or form. Just let it roll. It doesn't matter what the title of your podcast is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like the conversation goes there, let it go there, and speak on what you believe, and speak on what you're passionate about, and speak on what your purpose is, And so that was really convicting for me. And so I'm going to start doing that more, and just letting it be Doug Mitchell, and not necessarily always building great sales teams or always super tactical.
Yeah. Well, dude, I think just like Stuman said about, you have to be that example first. I mean, that's literally, you could talk about that. You start talking about sales teams, but what makes that great sales team and building that great sales team is the person behind it, that leader behind it. And that's where you can still talk about that. So I don't think you don't have to shy away from it at all. And you can still hit the point of that niche, but then really dive into that. Because telling that story, man, dude, I was getting chills you talking about it. And I'm just visioning that. I have a similar vision as well of being able to have land and my grandchildren's grandchildren talking about, man, it's because of Philip, because of like great grandpa Philip that we're in the situation we're in. He changed things. He made that change. So I totally resonate with that. And talk about it. It's all right, dude. I mean,
absolutely.
You can tie it back however you want, or even if it doesn't tie it back, that's kind of the beauty of a podcast. Okay. Just let it rip, man. But I love that. And you definitely should lean into speaking that message. That's leaving that actual legacy. So I love it, man. But Doug, appreciate you sharing all this value, sharing that intimate story there at the end, man. That went deep. Like you
Yeah,
said at the
absolutely.
beginning, offline, it was going to be totally different. But that's awesome. That's why I love having that question there to really dig in and get to know the person, and so the audience get to know you as well, and close out just like you said, getting to know you, man. So we
Mhm.
did your system right there. But if people want to get to know you, want to follow you, learn about more about building a great sales team,
Uh-huh.
where can they go follow you at?
So the easiest way is txbizdad.com. That's biz with the Z. So txbizdad.com. It's got all my socials on it. It's got the podcast on it. And every social handle of mine is at txbizdad, whether you're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn at txbizdad.
Nice. All right. Well, Doug, again, appreciate you coming on and appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.